A mission to remember. The cold darkness of space stretched endlessly beyond the observation deck of the Celestial Spear, an imposing alien warship patrolling the edges of uncharted territory. Captain Zoran Velrak stood tall, his sharp eyes fixed on the swirling nebula ahead. His scales shimmered faintly under the dim lights of the control room, a reflection of the authority he carried. Zoran was no ordinary captain. He was a veteran of countless battles, respected by his crew and feared by his enemies. But today, something felt different. His orders were clear. The Galactic Empire had deemed humans a dangerous and unpredictable species. Encounters were to be met with swift elimination. No questions, no hesitation. Zoran understood the necessity. He had witnessed firsthand the consequences of trusting outsiders. But as the long-range scanners swept the area, a faint blip appeared on the screen. A small human shuttle drifted near the edges of the nebula, its engine flickering weakly like a dying ember. The craft seemed barely functional, tumbling slowly through the void. "Captain, we have detected an unidentified human vessel," said Commander Alrek, Zoran's second-in-command. His voice carried the cold efficiency of someone who followed orders without question. "Shall I prepare the weapons?" Zoran didn't answer immediately. He narrowed his eyes, observing the shuttle's slow drift. The scanners showed no weapons, no shields, and no distress signal. It was as if the craft had been abandoned to the mercy of space. "Strange," Zoran muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "A lone shuttle, this far out." Commander Alrek shifted uncomfortably. "It could be a trap, Captain. Humans have been known to use deception." Zoran nodded. Deception was a human trait, and the Empire's records were filled with stories of betrayal. But something about this felt off. If it were a trap, why send a vessel so fragile, so exposed? "Lock on to the shuttle," Zoran ordered. His voice was calm but firm. "Bring it aboard for inspection." Alrek stiffened. "Captain, the orders." "I know the orders," Zoran interrupted, his gaze locking onto Alrek's. "But those orders do not account for curiosity." There was a brief silence. The crew exchanged uncertain glances, but no one dared challenge the captain's decision. Moments later, the shuttle was carefully pulled into the hangar bay by the warship's tractor beam. Zoran descended to the hangar himself, his heavy footsteps echoing through the silent chamber. The small shuttle sat motionless in the center, steam hissing from its overworked systems. A team of engineers approached carefully, cutting through the outer door with precision tools. With a soft hiss, the hatch slid open, revealing the dim interior. And there, slumped over the control panel, was a human woman. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale beneath her dark hair. She wore a torn flight suit, and in her arms, she clutched a small metallic case. Zoran stepped forward cautiously. The woman's eyes fluttered open, meeting his gaze for a fleeting moment. Her lips trembled, and with what little strength she had, she whispered, "Please, don't let them take it." Before he could respond, she collapsed into unconsciousness. Zoran's brow furrowed as he signaled the medics to rush forward. The woman was carefully lifted onto a stretcher and taken to the infirmary. But Zoran's attention lingered on the small case she had held so tightly. What was inside that could warrant such desperation? Ulrich's voice broke through the quiet. "Captain, if the Empire learns of this, they will question your loyalty." Zoran glanced at his second-in-command, his expression unreadable. "Let them question it," he said. "For now, we focus on keeping her alive." As Zoran walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this small act of defiance would change everything. The encounter. The infirmary hummed softly, a sterile glow filling the room as Captain Zoran stood by the medical bay's observation window. His sharp gaze rested on the fragile figure lying on the examination table. Dr. Amelia Carter, the human woman they had pulled from the drifting shuttle, remained unconscious, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Zoran's thoughts swirled like a storm. Why had he saved her? His actions defied every protocol. risking not only his career but the trust of his crew. And yet something about the woman's words haunted him. Don't let them take it. Her grip on that mysterious metallic case had been so tight that it took 2 medics to pry it from her hands. It now sat on Zoran's desk, untouched but radiating a quiet sense of danger. "Captain." Zoran turned to see Commander Alrek entering the room, his brow furrowed with disapproval. "She's stable for now," Alrek said, his voice stiff. "But I must ask, why are we keeping her alive?" Zoran's gaze didn't waver. "Because she knows something we don't." "She's human," Alrek countered. "That alone is reason enough to end this now." "The Empire." "The Empire isn't here," Zoran interrupted, his tone cold. "I make the decisions on this vessel." Alrek stiffened, clearly biting back further argument, but Zoran could sense the tension building among the crew. Whispers of doubt had already started to circulate. Trust was a fragile thing aboard a warship. Suddenly, a soft groan echoed from the medbay. Zoran's attention snapped back to Amelia as her eyes fluttered open. Confusion and fear flickered across her face as she took in the alien surroundings. Where am I?" she rasped. Zoran stepped into the room, towering over her with an imposing but calm demeanor. "You're aboard the Celestial Spear. You were drifting in a damaged shuttle. We brought you aboard." Amelia's eyes narrowed, her hand instinctively reaching for the case, only to find it gone. She bolted upright, ignoring the pain that shot through her body. "Where is it?" she demanded. "The case. You took it." Zoran's gaze didn't falter. "It's safe, but I need to know why you were out there alone, on the edge of a war zone." For a moment, Amelia hesitated, visibly weighing her options. Zoran noticed the flicker of distrust in her eyes, the same look he had seen from countless prisoners of war. Finally, she exhaled. "I'm not a soldier. I'm a scientist." Zoran raised a brow. "A scientist carrying classified technology." Amelia's hand brushed over a faint scar on her temple. "It's not a weapon," she said firmly. "It's a prototype. Something that could save countless lives, yours included." Zoran's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Amelia leaned back against the examination table, her voice trembling but steady. "The star systems near this region are dying. One by one, they're collapsing, pulling entire colonies into oblivion. I was part of a project to stabilize these stars, to reverse the decay." Zoran's expression darkened. Star collapses were not new to the Empire, but they were seen as natural occurrences. Attempts to interfere had always ended in failure. "If that's true, why did your own people abandon you?" Zoran asked. Amelia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because not everyone wants to save those systems. Some would rather see them burn." Zoran's gaze sharpened. The implications of her words were unsettling. "Who?" "Human factions," Amelia replied bitterly. "There are those who see the collapse as an opportunity to eliminate colonies seen as weak or unprofitable. My shuttle was sabotaged when they discovered I planned to activate the prototype." A long silence filled the room. Zoran studied her carefully, searching for any hint of deceit. But there was none, only exhaustion and defiance. "Why tell me this?" he finally asked. Amelia met his gaze without flinching. "Because if I don't, those systems will die. And it won't stop there." Zoran's mind raced. If what she said was true, this was no longer a simple matter of saving the human. It was a threat that could affect the Empire itself. Before he could respond, the door to the infirmary slid open. A young officer stepped inside, his expression tense. "Captain, the High Command is requesting a status report," the officer said carefully. "They detected an anomaly near the nebula. They're asking if we engaged with a human vessel." Zoran's eyes met Amelia's. "No," he said quietly. "Inform them the sector is clear." As the officer left, Ulrich's voice echoed from the corner of the room. "You're risking everything for her, Captain." Zoran's grip tightened at his side. "I know," he said. But in his heart, Zoran also knew this was just the beginning. a dangerous secret. The dim glow of Zoran's quarters cast long shadows across the metallic walls as the alien captain sat at his desk, his gaze locked onto the small metallic case. It sat silently, yet it seemed to hum with an invisible weight, a secret that could shift the balance of power. Amelia Carter, the human scientist, had been confined to a secure guest chamber just down the hall, under surveillance but treated with respect. Zoran's crew didn't question his decision openly, but he could feel the unspoken doubts creeping in. He had chosen to protect an enemy, defying every galactic empire protocol. The case was locked with a biometric seal, human technology. Zoran's claws hovered over it as he pondered his next move. Amelia had claimed the device inside could stabilize dying stars, yet factions within her own kind sought to destroy it. Could such technology truly exist? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Commander Alrek stepped into the room, his expression grim. "She's awake," Alrek reported, "and she's asking for you." Zoran nodded. "I'll handle it." As he entered Amelia's chamber, he found her sitting near the observation window, staring into the endless expanse of space. She didn't turn when he approached. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Amelia said softly. "Out here, the stars feel closer, but they're just as fragile as anything else." Zoran crossed his arms. "Fragile and dangerous. You're lucky to be alive." She finally glanced at him, her eyes steady. "I know, and I know you're wondering why you should trust me." Zoran remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Amelia rose from her seat and faced him fully. "I need to see the case." Zoran's gaze hardened. "That's not an option." "Then neither is saving your empire." Her words hung in the air like ice. Zoran's claws tightened involuntarily at his side, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You assume much, human. My empire is not so easily threatened." Amelia took a step forward, undeterred by his imposing figure. "I'm not assuming. I know what's coming. That case holds the key to stopping it, but I need access to it now." Zoran narrowed his eyes. "What exactly is inside?" She hesitated, as if weighing whether to reveal the truth. Finally, she exhaled. "A quantum stabilizer. It's experimental, but it works. The device uses gravitational pulses to reinforce a star's core, preventing collapse." Zoran's expression didn't shift. "You said your people sabotaged you. Why?" Amelia's jaw tightened. "The faction controlling the human coalition believes the outer colonies are a waste of resources. If the stars collapse, it wipes out those colonies and frees up assets for expansion elsewhere. Billions will die, but for them, it's a calculated loss." Zoran's cold exterior flickered briefly with something deeper, a quiet rage. He had seen this before in his own empire, where politics often outweighed morality. "And you risk your life to stop them," Zoran said, studying her carefully. Amelia gave a bitter smile. "Someone had to." A long silence filled the room. Zoran could hear the soft hum of the ship's engines beneath his feet, a constant reminder of the choices ahead. "Why not alert your leaders? Surely there are others who would listen," he asked. "I tried," Amelia replied, "but corruption runs deep. The people who sent me into that shuttle hoped I'd never return." Zoran turned to the observation window, gazing into the void. The weight of her words pressed down on him. He had spent his life serving the Galactic Empire, following orders without question. Now he stood at a crossroads. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but firm. "The case will remain in my possession. You'll have access to it, but under my supervision." Amelia's shoulders relaxed slightly, relief flickering in her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Zoran said coldly. "If I find any deception, I won't hesitate to destroy it." She met his gaze head-on. "Fair enough." As Zoran turned to leave, Commander Alrek appeared at the door, his expression tense. "Captain, we have a problem," Alrek said quietly. Zoran's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Alrek glanced briefly at Amelia before lowering his voice. We intercepted a transmission from the human coalition. They've detected our location, and they're sending ships. Zoran's expression darkened. How many? 3 battleships. They'll be here in less than a day. Amelia's face paled. They're coming for the device, she whispered. Zoran's gaze hardened. Let them come. As he left the chamber, Zoran felt the shift in the air, the calm before a storm that could decide the fate of more than just his ship. Betrayal on board. The celestial spear shuddered slightly as it moved through the cold, dark expanse of space. On the surface, everything seemed normal. The ship's sleek, towering frame cut through the stars with its usual precision. But beneath the surface, tension was mounting. Zoran could feel it in the air, heavy and oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Since Zoran had made the decision to protect Amelia Carter, whispers had spread through the ship. Some of his crew supported him, loyal to their captain, believing in his judgment. But there were others, doubters, who felt uneasy about harboring a human, especially one who had defied her own government. Zoran walked through the corridors with purpose, his claws clicking softly against the metal floor. He passed the crew quarters, each door lined with a tiny, blinking light indicating the status of its occupant. As he made his way to the command deck, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He had never felt this kind of unease aboard his ship before. As he entered the command center, the silence was almost suffocating. The crew members at their stations avoided his gaze, and the low hum of the ship's systems seemed louder than usual. Zoran took his seat at the captain's chair, his eyes scanning the room. "Report," he commanded, his voice steady. Lieutenant Trava, a young officer who had only recently joined the crew, hesitated before speaking. "Captain, the High Command has sent another transmission. They're requesting a full status update. They're asking about the human vessel we encountered." Zoran clenched his jaw. "Tell them everything is normal. Nothing unusual to report." "Understood, Captain." Zoran's attention was pulled toward the large communication panel in the center of the room. It flickered to life, displaying the face of General Velros, a high-ranking officer in the Galactic Empire. Velros' sharp, calculating eyes glared at Zoran from the screen. His voice was calm, but the weight of his words carried the unmistakable tone of command. "Captain Zoran," Velros said, "we've received reports that you have come into contact with human assets. This is a violation of the Empire's orders." Zoran's gaze remained unwavering. "General, I assure you, there is no cause for concern. The human shuttle we encountered was abandoned and unarmed. It posed no threat." Velros' eyes narrowed. "Is that so, Captain? Because our intelligence suggests otherwise. We've intercepted communications from the human coalition. They're sending a fleet to the coordinates of your ship. They believe you have something of theirs, and they are not known for their mercy." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Zoran's pulse quickened. The truth was out. "I will handle it, General," Zoran said, his voice firm. "This ship is not under threat." The screen flickered, and Velros' expression softened into a cold smile. "We shall see, Captain. I trust you'll make the right decision." With that, the transmission ended, leaving Zoran to face the harsh reality of the situation. The Empire was onto him, and Amelia's presence aboard the ship was no longer a secret. The door to the command center opened with a hiss, and Commander Alrek entered. His expression was grim. "Captain, I've just received word from engineering. We're detecting a power fluctuation near the hangar bay. It could be a malfunction, or it could be sabotage." Zoran's eyes flashed with suspicion. Sabotage. It was becoming all too clear. There was someone on board working against him. "Have the engineers investigated immediately," Zoran ordered. "And keep this quiet. I don't want panic spreading." As Ulrich turned to leave, a loud bang echoed through the corridor. The ship jolted violently, throwing Zoran and Ulrich off balance. "Report," Zoran barked, gripping the edge of his chair to steady himself. "Explosion in the hangar. A voice shouted from one of the communication consoles. It was sabotage, Captain. Someone tampered with the engine core. Zoran's heart skipped a beat. Someone had intentionally sabotaged the ship. Seal off the hangar bay, Zoran commanded, his voice cold and decisive, and lock down all access points. As the crew scrambled to follow orders, Zoran's mind raced. Who could it be? Who on his ship had betrayed him? He trusted his crew, but trust could be a fragile thing, especially when there were so many at stake. The answer came swiftly. Ulrich. Zoran turned sharply to face his second-in-command, whose face had paled at the news of the sabotage. Commander, Zoran said, his voice low and dangerous, I need to know the truth. Who on this ship is working against me? Ulrich stiffened, his eyes widening with fear. Captain, I would never betray you. Zoran studied him for a long moment, his gaze piercing. Then explain why there was an explosion in the hangar. And explain why I can feel the tension growing in the crew. Someone on this ship wants to see us fail. Ulrich's eyes darted around, and Zoran could see the wheels turning in his mind. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, Ulrich spoke, his voice trembling. Captain, Suddenly, the door to the command center burst open, and a group of armed crew members stormed in, weapons raised. Zoran's claws were already out, his eyes glowing with fury. A mutiny. Don't make this harder than it has to be, one of the officers said, a smug grin on his face. Zoran's mind raced. Ulrich had been involved in this. His second-in-command had been playing both sides. The crew had been divided, and now it was clear. There were those who had chosen to side with the Empire over Zoran's leadership. The moment of betrayal had come, but Zoran wasn't about to give up without a fight. He stepped forward, his voice as sharp as his claws. This ship is mine, Zoran growled. And if you want it, you'll have to go through me first. The room fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the hum of the ship's systems and the heavy breath of those who had turned against him. Zoran wasn't just fighting for his life now. He was fighting for everything he believed in. The chase. The celestial spear drifted silently through the stars, its once imposing presence now diminished by the chaos that had taken hold. Zoran stood at the command console, his sharp eyes scanning the battle map. The ship was damaged, its engines slightly impaired from the sabotage, its defenses weakened by the mutiny, and yet they were still moving. The rebellion aboard the ship had been swift and brutal. Ulrich, once a trusted second-in-command, had led a faction of crew members in an attempt to take control of the ship. Zoran had crushed the mutiny with the precision of a seasoned warrior, but at a cost. Several loyal crew members had been injured in the ensuing battle, and the ship's integrity had been compromised. But what hurt most was the betrayal that had come from within. Zoran had trusted Ulrich, believed in his loyalty. Now that trust had been shattered. The mutineers had been subdued, but there was no time for reflection. The enemy was closing in. Captain, we've detected enemy ships on the horizon. A voice broke through Zoran's thoughts. It was Lieutenant Trava, who had proven to be one of the few allies still loyal to him. Zoran turned to face him. How many? 3 battleships, Captain. The human coalition's fleet is approaching rapidly. They've already locked onto our position. We have less than 6 hours before they arrive. The weight of the situation crashed down on Zoran's shoulders. The human coalition. They weren't just a distant enemy now. They were closing in on him with all their might. Zoran had expected a pursuit, but not this quick. The coalition must have known about the device. They must have realized that he had Amelia, the key to their weapon. Zoran's thoughts flashed back to Amelia. She had stayed in the observation room, her face pale but determined. She had been the one who warned him about the coalition's ruthlessness. She had been the one who placed her trust in him. And now, it was his turn to return that trust. But with every passing moment, the risk of failure grew. We're being hunted, Zoran muttered to himself. Lieutenant Trava's voice broke his thoughts again. "Captain, the ship's engines are still unstable. We can't outrun them without risking a full breakdown. We need to find another way." Zoran considered their options. The idea of facing the human coalition head-on wasn't appealing. He had already been branded a traitor by the Galactic Empire. The consequences of a direct confrontation would be catastrophic, but running wouldn't solve anything either. He couldn't allow them to capture Amelia. And the prototype. "Prepare to engage evasive maneuvers," Zoran ordered, his voice cold and decisive. "We're not running. We're not surrendering. We'll make them chase us until they regret it." The crew sprang into action. The ship's remaining functional engines hummed to life, and the celestial spear began to veer sharply to the side, dodging incoming fire from the enemy ships. Zoran's fingers flew over the controls as he directed the ship with surgical precision, taking it through narrow asteroid fields and dense nebula clouds. It wasn't just a matter of speed. It was a test of Zoran's resolve, his ability to think on his feet, to outsmart and outmaneuver his pursuers. "Captain, they're closing in," Lieutenant Trava reported urgently. "They've launched fighters, small but fast. They'll be on us within minutes." Zoran's jaw tightened. The last thing he needed was a full-blown dogfight. He had to buy time. "Activate the decoys," he ordered. "Engage the cloaking device. We'll use the asteroid field to lose them." With a hiss of energy, the ship's cloaking field shimmered to life, making the celestial spear nearly invisible to the naked eye. Zoran's hands moved rapidly over the tactical console, and the ship veered into the asteroid field at high speed. The decoys launched, creating false signals to confuse the enemy's targeting systems. For a moment, the ship seemed to vanish into the chaotic clouds of asteroids and debris. But the coalition was no fool. "Captain," Lieutenant Trava warned. "They've detected our last position. They're pushing through the asteroid field." Zoran's mind raced. He needed a plan, a way to shake them off without risking too much damage to the ship. His thoughts turned to Amelia, still hidden somewhere in the depths of the ship. She was their wild card. Her knowledge could make the difference, but Zoran hadn't dared involve her in the ship's defense. She had come aboard for a singular purpose, and that purpose was far too important. But now, as the ship shuddered under another blast from the enemy, Zoran knew he had no choice. He had to trust her. "Trava," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Send word to Dr. Carter. I need her in the war room. Immediately." Moments later, Amelia stepped onto the bridge, her face pale but resolute. She had changed into a simple suit, practical and unassuming, but Zoran could see the fire burning behind her eyes. "Captain," she said, meeting his gaze without hesitation, "you're running out of time. What can I do to help?" Zoran didn't mince words. "You've seen how the prototype works. We need to modify it. Turn it into a weapon that can disable their ships. You're the only one who can do this." Amelia's brows furrowed. "I told you, it's not designed for combat. It's a stabilizer, not a weapon." "Then modify it," Zoran replied, his voice sharp. "I need you to turn it into something that will stop them before they reach us. If you don't, we're finished." Amelia nodded, her jaw set with determination. "All right, but I need to access the core systems of the ship's power grid." Zoran didn't hesitate. "Get to engineering. I'll have the crew clear the way for you." As Amelia rushed off to her task, Zoran felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. In the meantime, he continued to command the ship, weaving through the asteroid field with ruthless precision, constantly staying one step ahead of the pursuing enemy. The next few hours felt like a lifetime. Each twist and turn, every moment of fleeting hope, was followed by the cold dread that they might not survive the next round of enemy fire. Yet in the midst of all this chaos, Zoran could feel it. The unbreakable bond between him and Amelia. He had chosen to trust her, and in return, she was choosing to trust him. They weren't just running from the enemy, they were fighting together, each moment pulling them closer to the only goal that mattered: survival. The final stand. The celestial spear shuddered violently as another wave of fire slammed into its hull. The faint hum of the ship's systems was now drowned out by the sound of alarms, a constant reminder that time was running out. Zoran gripped the command console, his sharp eyes scanning the tactical displays. The human coalition's fleet was relentless, and they were closing in faster than Zoran had anticipated. They had evaded capture in the asteroid field for hours, using every trick in the book to stay one step ahead. But now, there was nowhere left to hide. The celestial spear was damaged, its engines strained under the weight of constant evasive maneuvers, and the cloaking device was failing. The ship could no longer outrun the enemy. Zoran knew they had only one option left: to make a stand. "Captain," Lieutenant Trava called, his voice tense. "They're within firing range. They're targeting our weapons systems." Zoran didn't flinch. He had known this moment would come. His crew had fought hard to keep the ship alive, but the enemy wasn't going to show mercy. It was time to decide. Would they fight to the bitter end, or would they surrender and risk losing everything? "Prepare for battle," Zoran ordered. "Activate all remaining weapon systems. We're not running anymore. We're taking the fight to them." Trava hesitated for only a second before turning to the weapons officer, giving the order to arm the remaining weapons. The ship's main cannons hummed to life, and the dim glow of the energy shields flickered as they powered up. Zoran could feel the tension in the air. His crew had been through a lot already, and now they were on the verge of a final confrontation. But there was no turning back now. As the ship's weapons charged, Zoran turned his attention to the comms panel. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "How are we doing on the prototype?" Amelia's voice crackled over the comm, urgent but calm. "I've modified the stabilizer. It's ready. I've rerouted the power through the secondary reactors to give it enough energy. It should disable their ships, temporarily." Zoran's heart raced as he processed her words. Temporarily. It wasn't enough to destroy the enemy, but it could buy them precious moments. "Good," Zoran said. "I need you in the control room now. We're about to make our move." Minutes felt like hours as the enemy fleet moved into position. The human coalition's ships were formidable, their massive hulls lined with weapons that could obliterate the celestial spear in seconds. But Zoran wasn't afraid. He had seen death before. He had stood on the edge of impossible odds and fought to survive. This time, he would fight for something greater than just his own life. The enemy ships finally came into view, massive silhouettes against the backdrop of distant stars. Zoran's heart pounded as the targeting system locked onto the lead battleship. It was a beast of a ship. Its guns were aimed directly at the celestial spear, and Zoran could feel the pressure mounting with every passing second. "Now, Captain," Trava asked, his hands hovering over the firing controls. Zoran nodded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Now." With a surge of power, the ship's main cannons fired. The first blast hit the lead battleship squarely in the side, sending ripples of energy across its hull. But it wasn't enough to do serious damage. The enemy retaliated immediately, their weapons lighting up the dark void of space with deadly force. The celestial spear rocked violently as the enemy ships fired upon it, the shields flaring brightly before absorbing the impact. "We're holding up," Trava said, "but their shields are stronger. We need more firepower." Zoran's mind raced. The celestial spear couldn't last much longer. The energy shields were depleting faster than expected, and the ship was slowly losing maneuverability. It wasn't going to survive another barrage like that. But Amelia had given him an opening. He just had to make sure the prototype worked. "Dr. Carter," Zoran said, his voice urgent. "Activate the modified stabilizer now." "I'm ready," Amelia replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I'll channel the energy into the ship's core." Zoran watched as the dim lights in the control room flickered, and a low hum filled the air. The celestial spear's engines flared briefly before stabilizing. The ship seemed to breathe with new energy, and Zoran felt a surge of hope. The prototype had been activated, but would it work? Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the ship, and the view screen flashed with images of the enemy battleships. The energy pulse from the prototype shot out, hitting the lead ship directly. For a brief moment, it seemed as if time stood still. The celestial spear's sensors registered a surge of energy. And then, the enemy ships faltered. The lead battleship's shields flickered and dimmed, the systems failing in a spectacular display of sparks and static. The other ships hesitated, their weapons deactivating as they struggled to regain control. Zoran couldn't believe his eyes. It was working. The energy pulse had temporarily disabled the Coalition's fleet. "We've got them," Trava shouted, his face breaking into a grin. "They're offline. Their systems are malfunctioning. Now's our chance." Zoran didn't hesitate. He barked out orders, his voice commanding and steady. "Engage full power to the engines. We're taking the fight to the second fleet. We won't have long before they regain control." The celestial spear surged forward, its remaining power now fully engaged. The damage it had sustained was considerable, but the momentum was on their side. Zoran wasn't about to let the enemy recover. They had a window of opportunity, and he would use it to its fullest. The next few minutes were a blur. Zoran guided the ship through the disoriented enemy fleet, using their temporary disadvantage to his advantage. The celestial spear fired relentlessly, each shot weakening the enemy's defenses, breaking their resolve. It was a desperate, calculated assault, a final stand. As the last of the enemy ships began to retreat, Zoran allowed himself a moment of relief. The celestial spear had made it. They had survived the onslaught. But victory had come at a great cost. The ship was battered, its systems barely functional, and the crew was exhausted. And yet, Zoran knew that this battle wasn't over. The human coalition had felt the sting of their defeat, but they wouldn't stop hunting him. For now, though, Zoran allowed himself a fleeting sense of triumph. They had faced impossible odds, and they had won. But the war was far from over, and Zoran was ready for whatever came next. The celestial spear had proven its strength, and so had he. An unbreakable bond. The celestial spear drifted quietly in the vastness of space, its once pristine exterior now marred by the scars of battle. The sounds of creaking metal echoed through the corridors as the crew moved silently, exhausted but triumphant. They had fought with everything they had, against the overwhelming force of the human coalition, against the whispers of betrayal within their own ranks, and against the ever-present shadow of doubt that hung over them. But now, as the ship limped toward its destination, Zoran couldn't help but feel a quiet pride swell within him. They had done it. They had survived. Zoran stood on the bridge, his sharp eyes scanning the stars. The battle had been fierce, but the prototype, Amelia's invention, had made all the difference. The energy pulse had disabled the human coalition's fleet long enough for the celestial spear to push through. Zoran knew they had barely escaped with their lives, but they had also bought themselves time. Time for a new chapter to unfold. The ship had sustained heavy damage. Its main engines were barely functional, and many of its systems were offline. But it was still operational. It was still alive, and so were they. Zoran's thoughts turned to his crew. They had followed him into the heart of the storm, and now they would follow him into whatever came next. There were no more lies, no more secrets. The mutiny had been quashed, but the damage it had caused would take time to heal. Trust had been broken, but it could be rebuilt. Slowly, the door to the command center slid open, and Amelia Carter entered, her footsteps echoing softly in the quiet room. She was tired, her face pale, her eyes carrying the weight of everything that had transpired. But there was a new resolve in her gaze. She was no longer just a scientist caught in the middle of a war. She was a survivor, just like the rest of them. And Zoran realized she was part of his crew now. "Captain," she said, her voice steady, though there was a note of exhaustion in it. "The prototype's systems are stable. I've made adjustments to the data, but there's more work to do. We'll need a safe place to make repairs." Zoran nodded, his mind already calculating their next steps. "I know," he said quietly. "We've lost time, but we haven't lost the war." Amelia walked closer, studying him with the quiet intensity that had become familiar over the past few days. There was something different in the way she looked at him now. A silent understanding, an unspoken bond. They had gone through the fire together, and somehow they had emerged stronger. But the truth was, their survival was only the beginning. They had a purpose now, something bigger than the Galactic Empire or the human coalition. They had a future, if they could stay ahead of those who would hunt them down. "We can't stay here for long," Amelia said, breaking the silence. "The coalition will send reinforcements, and once they find us, they'll never stop." Zoran's eyes hardened, the weight of her words sinking in. "I know," he said. "We'll move, but not before I make sure my crew is ready for whatever comes next." Amelia's eyes softened, a brief flicker of gratitude passing between them. "They're loyal to you, Zoran. Despite everything, they believe in you." Zoran met her gaze, his heart heavy with the burden of leadership. The betrayal had shaken him, but the loyalty of his crew had held firm. He had led them into battle, and they had followed him without question, even when the path seemed uncertain. Now it was his turn to lead them through the next phase of their journey. "What about you?" Zoran asked, his voice low. "Do you believe in me?" Amelia didn't hesitate. "I believe in what we're doing, and I believe in you. No one else would have done what you did. You risked everything to save me, to protect something bigger than just survival. You didn't have to, but you did, and I'll never forget that." Her words cut through Zoran like a blade, but it was a good kind of pain, one that filled him with a sense of purpose. She was right. His decision to save her had been a gamble, a risk that could have cost him everything. But in the end, it had brought them closer. They were bound by something unspoken now, a bond that went beyond loyalty or duty. They were bound by something stronger, a shared commitment to doing what was right, no matter the cost. Zoran stood up straighter, his mind clearing as the weight of responsibility settled back onto his shoulders. There was no time to waste. They had to get moving, and they had to do it now. But there was something else, a new understanding between him and Amelia. "We'll take the fight to them," Zoran said, his voice steady with resolve. "We'll make sure the galaxy knows what they're up against. We won't just survive this war, we'll change it." Amelia's eyes sparkled with determination. "And we'll do it together." Zoran smiled, something he hadn't done in a long time. It was a small thing, but it felt like a victory. The universe had thrown everything at him, but he had survived. And so had the woman who had once been an enemy, now a trusted ally. Together, they would find a way to rebuild, to fight for something bigger than themselves. The door slid open, and the crew began to filter in, tired but unbroken. Zoran felt the weight of their eyes on him, each one filled with a mixture of respect and expectation. They had followed him through the storm, and now they would follow him into the future. "We're ready, Captain," Lieutenant Travis said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "Where do we go from here?" Zoran looked around the room, his crew standing tall, their faces filled with determination. He looked at Amelia one last time before turning to face the crew. His voice was steady, unwavering. "We go to where we can make a difference. We go to where the galaxy needs us most. We go to war." The crew nodded, and Zoran felt the weight of leadership settle comfortably on his shoulders once again. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and uncertainty, but for the first time, he felt ready. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for something that mattered. And in that moment, Zoran knew that nothing could break the bond that had been forged between him and his crew. They were unbreakable now. Together, they would change the course of the galaxy. The final stand had been won. Now, the real fight would begin.